Yeah, thank you very much. Inspired by Paul, who sort of introduced us to the ideas of positive thinking, or at least his wife introduced us to the ideas of positive thinking. It's no longer the glass is half full, but it's 75% full these days. So in light of that, and I think the authors already picked up on that, they're now talking about many eggs in the basket as opposed to just having one. I would indeed nudge a bit further and say Malawi at the cusp of the structural transformation. I think there are two reasons for that, listening to the presentation, which I found quite interesting, and I learned quite a bit about Malawi. Is indeed, yes, Malawi, the structural transformation hasn't happened. The share of agriculture is about 30–35%. That has been there for quite a while. There hasn't really been urbanization. So at that level, indeed, structural transformation hasn't been happening. But at the same time, has that been bad? Maybe the country finds itself indeed at a very early stage of development. And we also see that poverty has been declining in the rural areas from 65% in 1997, I believe, to 45% in 2009. It was even much faster in the urban areas, from 52 to 15%. That's already right there. An interesting fact, I think, which could be explored a bit further, why this rapid decline in urban poverty, which is much faster even than in the rural areas. So if you put these two together, some things have been happening, and sort of where does Malawi fit? And I think that the study could sort of situate it within a structural transformation graph across different countries to see, sort of say, look, we're really at the beginning, at the cusp of the structural transformation. And why do I think sort of that idea comes out is there has been this large positive development which everybody talks about, which everybody is still flabbergasted by. So this smallholder agricultural revolution induced by the fertilizer subsidies. So if that's indeed the case, and indeed we see this growth, then I was really puzzled by one element which was mentioned in the paper, that there are no multiplier effects. So the whole idea of why we think about this agriculture-led development is indeed that in a country where you get sort of broad-based income growth, that's sort of one condition. If you get broad-based income growth, that hopefully would translate into demand for non-traded goods and services. That's sort of the second part of it. That also, of course, assumes that there is a response, a supply response, that indeed there is a sector which can respond to that increased demand for these non-traded goods and services. So I think it would be useful in the paper to think a bit more about two aspects of these conditions which need to be in place for that agriculture-led development strategy to work. First, has the growth, the agriculture growth we talk about, indeed been broad-based? I think a lot of what we learned from the study is that in the past there was a lot of focus on tobacco, still is, but that tobacco growth was largely by estate farmers by estates, with basically the smallholders only getting a little bit of that as wage laborers. While now you basically get a new export crop, they're actually exporting maize, you get a new crop, but actually it's supposedly grown by everybody. So I think we need to dig into that. If we have had like, what, 3, 4, 5 years of that agricultural growth. So who is benefiting from that? What do the data, what do the micro data tell us? Is this the larger farmer, the larger smallholder farmers who are producing these surpluses? Where are the subsidies going? Digging, how does that relate to poverty reduction? We see, what, 5 to 10% reduction in poverty over the 5 years. So where is that concentrated? Is it geographically concentrated, certain areas? If it's geographically concentrated, are there more multiplier effects in these areas as opposed to there where the subsidies aren't working? So I think the story could be enriched by sort of trying to see, look, is this model, which underlies a lot of what we believe in, and which we've been talking about, is it working? And so I think that's sort of on the supply side, the agriculture supply side. Is the growth indeed as broad-based as we like it to believe? Then I think on the second part, and the paper does talk about that, is sort of assuming that it has been broad-based income growth for 4 or 5 years, why hasn't that generated a supply response on the non-farm sector? And so I think the paper does mention a number of good reasons for that. We clearly see good road density, good connections with cities, but there's sort of the transport cost. Again, that transport cost, is that working is that as high everywhere, or is it lower in certain areas than other areas? So I think disaggregating, trying to dig a little bit deeper, and sort of testing, I think what Ravi was calling for in the Uganda case study. So if you take that sort of theoretical model, engage with it and see maybe by disaggregating the data according to certain areas, see if you can speak to it a bit more. Then I think sort of these two issues are for me ways one could further enrich the paper, which has already a lot of information there. I think it sketches the situation quite well. As a last point, so just to throw it at you, of course, I think we have Zimbabwe next door, which of course is no longer a source of growth. So the fact that Zimbabwe has been in a quagmire for a number of years, how has that affected potential growth in Malawi, I think could be another issue one could briefly comment on. With that, thanks a lot.